Welcome to the Weekly Dose podcast, your one-stop shop for the weekly news in incretin mimetic therapies, with your host, man on the Manjaro, Dave Knapp. Welcome to the one and only Weekly Dose podcast. I'm your host, Dave Knapp, man on the Manjaro. That's why I'm here on this Tuesday, July 23rd, 2024 edition of the Weekly Dose podcast. You are on the pen. Wegovy, Saxenda, Victoza, Trulicity, Manjaro, Zepbound compound. That pen. That's what we talk about here on the Weekly Dose podcast. We try to give you about a 15-minute rundown of all the incretin mimetic, obesity, diabetes news. Let's get right into it. If you didn't hear this on the YouTube channel, we've got an exciting announcement that I want everybody to be aware of here in the next few weeks. Probably, I'm hoping by this time in August, we'll be releasing On the GLP-1 Pen, a beginner's guide to understanding GLP-1 medications. I may tweak the title between now and then, but a book. And I want to give you a little bit of background about this book. So I've written this book. It is a sort of my story is woven into this greater story about the history of GLP-1s, what they do, and broader obesity medicine, where they're at today, where they're headed in the future. And the idea is that the book will describe these medications in terms that anybody can understand. So if you're somebody who has loved ones in your life who don't understand the medications you're on or have given you pushback or just want to understand more, or if you have people who have reached out wondering if they may benefit from GLP-1s, this is going to be an easy to read book. And it's going to be just basically a cover to cover. It's going to tell the story that we've told on the pen for the last year and a half. I'm so excited for the launch of this book. I've been working on it for months and have had more bandwidth to work on it lately. And I'm super excited to bring this to you in the next month. So be on the lookout. The best way to make sure that you stay tuned to updates and potential savings on that book, you're going to want to go to onthepen.com/emails, sign up for email alerts at onthepen.com. But let's get into the news this week. There's some exciting news out of China this week. So a couple of stories here out of China. First one is from a company called Gan Lee. And if you're not familiar with Gan Lee, they're actually consider them sort of like the Novo Nordisk of China. They were the first Chinese company to bring to the Chinese market a version of analog insulin. And so they're a pretty big deal over there, and they've gotten into the GLP-1 game. They have a phase 2B trial that we heard a little bit about at 30 weeks with the GLP-1 receptor agonist GZR18. Now, there are a bunch of doses, but for all intents and purposes, the high dose was 48 milligrams biweekly, or some got 24 milligrams weekly just to kind of test the efficacy there. And at that high dose, you saw if they were on the 24 milligrams weekly, 17.29% weight reduction and 17.78, so slightly higher with the 48 biweekly. And so really, really great news. In 30 weeks, almost 18% of one's body weight was lost compared to the about 1% that people saw on placebo. Really exciting out of China. And again, this is one is early on, but the idea or the prospects of taking it biweekly instead of weekly may be appealing to some. And of course, the Chinese market is eager to hear about options coming from their own shores, because just this week you heard that Eli Lilly had tirzepatide, or this was several weeks ago, that tirzepatide was approved in Chinese markets. And so that is going to be another pull on the supply of the United States medications as well. So it's good to see other countries sort of coming along the GLP-1 game. In China also is a company called Innovent that is partnered with Eli Lilly. And we've talked about this one on our channel before, but Mazdutide, we got a little bit more information about Mazdutide this week. Now that's a dual agonist from, again, Innovent and Eli Lilly. And it is a GLP-1/glucagon. So unlike Retatrutide that we've talked about a lot on this channel, it doesn't have the GIP component. So it's just GLP-1 plus glucagon. And in the diabetics that had taken it after 24 weeks, they saw an A1C reduction of 2.15, which compared to tirzepatide after 40 weeks, what they saw was 2.07. So Mazdutide slightly edging that. And those patients also lost almost 10% of their body weight after 48 weeks, which is really good for diabetic numbers. So that was Mazdutide over in China. You can check out a little bit more about that information that I just shared over at Fierce Biotech. The link will be in the show notes. of this video. There's a ton more to get into, and we are going to do that in just a moment. But before we do, I want to remind you all that we do a weekly podcast called On the Pen, and it's a live show that happens every Thursday night. And you should be joining us for that if you're not. It happens at 9 p.m. Central Time. This past week, we had Dr. Weiner from Pound of Cure podcast on. The week before that, we had another wonderful guest in the form of Dr. Beverly Chang, who is a world-renowned obesity medicine doctor. We've just had lots and lots of great guests. We're 73 episodes deep on that show. Sometimes it's community spotlight, but oftentimes we have experts and really, really great guests. So if you're not checking that out, please jump over to our YouTube channel and subscribe there, and let's keep rolling with the news. If you've hung out with me long enough at On the Pen, you know that one of my favorite topics is Retatrutide. No matter how you say it, Retatrutide or Retatrutide. That's the triple agonist from Eli Lilly. And we learned some more interesting news. If you missed that video, I just want to fly over this. So there's a little bit more in-depth video on YouTube and TikTok. But check this out. Compared to natural hormones, Retatrutide is more potent at GIP by a factor of 8.9%. It's less potent at glucagon at 0.3% and less potent at GLP-1 by 0.4%. Now get this. Retatrutide is 15 times more powerful a GIP medication than a GLP-1 medication. And why is that important? Well, we've talked about tirzepatide, Mounjaro and Zepbound, which often just gets called a GLP-1. All of these medications do, because everything before, as far as incretin mimetics are concerned, everything before Mounjaro and Zepbound was just a GLP-1. So then Mounjaro comes along here, and that's tirzepatide, and people just sort of call it GLP-1, but it's not really a GLP-1. It's a GIP medication, and it's 5 times more potent a GIP medication than it is a GLP-1 medication. So that was interesting to hear that Retatrutide is 15 times more a GIP than a GLP-1. And then, of course, they add the glucagon component. So when you sort of factor in the ratio of the medication, it is 87% GIP impact. It is glucagon, 7% a glucagon impact, and 6% a GLP-1 impact. So you see GLP-1 is actually becoming, on the Eli Lilly development side, less of a factor, and GIP is sort of rising as the incretin of choice. Now that works sort of counter to what you see over at Novo Nordisk, who is sort of stuck with GLP-1 agonism in semaglutide, and they've just sort of gone the route of evolving and building on top of what they've been able to accomplish with semaglutide. That's why you see with CagriSema, for example, a combination of semaglutide plus an amylin agonist. So amylin, a non-incretin hormone, as is glucagon, really. But amylin is a non-incretin hormone co-secreted in the pancreas with insulin. And people are seeing weight loss comparable to what Retatrutide is actually showing now, TBD on the liver side, right? Because Retatrutide has also been shown to really melt liver fat, to reduce fibrosis stages, and do so much more. I'd be interested to see if it's going to pan out similarly with CagriSema, but certainly the glucagon agonism is something to continue to watch. As Dr. Chang put it so wonderfully a couple of weeks ago on the show, it acts peripherally for weight loss. So there's the central weight loss that is impacted by energy intake, where Retatrutide adding the glucagon component really helps with that energy expenditure, really ramping up and revving up one's metabolism. So, of course, we'll continue to follow Retatrutide. I had to drop that into the podcast this week because Retatrutide is one of my favorite topics on this channel. So one of the topics that we've talked about on this channel before is just the fact that all these existing incretin medications are available in injectable form, right? We posited on a video today about why we don't have high-dose Rybelsus yet. It tested positively in trials at 50 milligrams. People saw similar weight loss to Wegovy. We know that now Novo Nordisk hasn't gone forward with quite yet with submitting that to the FDA because of the amount of API, active pharmaceutical ingredient, that is required at 50 milligrams weekly. That's 145 times the amount that comes in the highest dose we have currently of Wegovy, which is 2.4 milligrams weekly. You imagine taking 50 milligrams daily in a pill version, that's 350 milligrams or 145 times what comes in this pen. It's just not sustainable. So I'm not sure we're going to see 50 milligram Rybelsus hit the market. But that brings up the point of manufacturing and the fact that scaling these medications is complicated for a myriad of reasons. One is obviously the pens, the intricate design of these pens, the fact that they have to maintain sterility and then be finished and filled in very sterile facilities. That just all requires moving mountains to bring a medication to market, where pill forms will offer some relief to that. In the meantime, we do have these pens that are really, really difficult to maintain proper temperature when so many people are receiving them mail order. And I just want to camp out on this topic because there was a link shared by Clark Kent, hat tip to Clark Kent, our producer of this podcast, who provides so much of the stories that we talk about on this channel. But high temperatures destroy peptides. And the fact that we're getting medication that costs upwards of $1,000. Now, most people shouldn't be paying that. If you're paying more than that, as Dr. Albert pointed out this week, you're getting ripped off. You should be able to take advantage of a manufacturer savings card. And so that you really shouldn't be paying more than that, especially with compounds available. But you think about these coming through the mail in the summertime, they could sit in your mailbox and get up to 125 degrees in your mailbox when it's super hot. So there's something called VARCode, right? And it's just going to be linked in the description of this video. But VARCode is a really interesting smart tag that could be added to these boxes of medications that's really going to allow patients to sort of tell if their medication was ever time temperature abused. So if it'd be able to tell you, for example, if the product went outside of the temperature range and for how long it was outside that temperature range. And I got to think that we should start demanding this of our medication, because I've heard enough from enough people who, suddenly go a month and they just feel like the medication isn't working. Could that be in some cases, not all in their head? Could that be in some cases that their medication was indeed time temperature abused? There are not any real regulations around this as far as receiving mail order medications. And I really do believe that this is a contributing factor to some lack of efficacy of the medication for some people. Again, these peptides are destroyed at high temperatures. And so we need to know, was our medicine properly cared for during transit? And VARCode could offer just that. So I hope to see Eli Lilly and Novo Nordisk both adopt something like this in the future. Of course, it would add costs for them, but it would ensure patient safety. So if that is a priority for them, I hope that this would become a priority to add a product like VARCode to the shipping chain. When people have to receive these medications, they ought to know that they were well taken care of in transit to them. This is one for the real nerds out there, so hang with me. If you are a nerd, you're really going to enjoy this. So Eli Lilly has done some real innovation in the actual manufacturing of the active pharmaceutical ingredient tirzepatide peptides. So peptides have apparently used the same process since the late 1950s. In fact, this process won a Nobel Prize in 1984. That was the year before your boy was born. And so that platform has sort of been used to manufacture the current peptides that are out there. Well, Eli Lilly set out to find a way to basically improve upon, streamline, and make sustainable the process of producing these peptides. So in this article, when I'll link it in the description of the show notes here, Bioprocessing Online sort of took a deep dive into how Lilly has changed this. And they've basically gone to a form of manufacturing peptides that is called liquid phase peptide synthesis / solid phase peptide synthesis. It combines traditional approaches to synthetic peptide production and new age ideas of manufacturing peptides. It's a really fascinating article, and it just has really allowed them to scale the manufacturing process of these peptides and allow them to do continuous processing of these peptides rather than having to do them in batches. And so a really fascinating article. If you really get into the nerd science, this is one for you at Bioprocessing Online. And kudos to Eli Lilly for continuing to innovate, not only in the drugs that are available, but in the manufacturing of these peptides as well, because the API will become more and more of an issue over time, as we talked about Novo Nordisk having these issues with not being able to bring high dose Rybelsus to the market, which would be a huge game changer. A pill form to bring Wegovy-like results, semaglutide in pill form. If they could do that, if they could manufacture the API fast enough, that would be a game changer for the market. But the API is the holdup. So hopefully they're doing some innovating on their side from a manufacturing standpoint also. But kudos to the team at Eli Lilly for continuing to innovate on the manufacturing side as well. Hey, I hope you enjoyed this episode of On the Pen, the Weekly Dose. If you did, please give it a 5-star rating and review. That just helps more people get their eyes and ears on the podcast. Really, really appreciate all you do for me. Thank you for being such a wonderful community, and we will catch you next week. Have a great one.